He thought the war ended 10 years ago, until a widow handed him half of a broken medal, the same one buried with his best friend. But when that medal called him back into the forest, he found something far darker than war itself, a secret buried by men he once trusted, and a truth only faith could uncover. In a storm of betrayal, bullets, and fire, one Marine, his loyal German shepherd, and a single promise would test the meaning of courage and redemption. Because sometimes God's miracles don't come from heaven, they rise from the ashes. If you believe faith still changes lives, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share this story, and comment Amen to help spread hope and light across the world. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching, and may God bless you all. The morning mist hung low over the small town of Redwood Hollow, a quiet settlement tucked between the rolling hills of northern Wyoming. Autumn had stripped the trees of their leaves, leaving behind bare branches that swayed like skeletal arms under the biting wind. The town's only cemetery lay on a slope overlooking the valley, its iron gates creaking with every gust. Frost clung to the marble headstones, and the faint scent of pine mixed with the cold air, sharp enough to sting the lungs of anyone brave enough to visit this early. Jack Miller, a man of 48, stood alone near the farthest row of graves, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. His rugged face was carved by time and hardship, with a short beard peppered with gray and eyes the color of worn steel. Eyes that had seen too much of war and too little of peace. Years in the Marines had left him broad-shouldered, his posture still disciplined even when wearing a weathered flannel jacket and faded jeans instead of a uniform. Life in solitude had hardened him, yet there remained a quiet gentleness whenever he glanced down at the German shepherd sitting loyally by his boots. The dog, Rex, was 6 years old, strong and alert, with a black and tan coat gleaming even under the pale sun. His right ear had a small notch, an old scar from a rescue mission Jack could never forget. Rex's amber eyes followed every movement around them, protective yet calm, as if sensing the burden his owner carried. Jack had come to visit the grave of his fallen comrade, Mark Harris, who had died beside him a decade earlier in a dusty village halfway across the world. Every year, on this same day, Jack brought a single white rose and laid it over the simple headstone that read, Sergeant Mark Harris, a brother in arms. But that morning, someone else was there. A woman knelt at the grave, her hands clasped around something metallic. Her coat was long and dark brown, and a knitted scarf hid half her face from the cold. When she looked up, her eyes, gray like storm clouds, met Jack's for the first time. She was in her mid-40s, with fine lines marking years of grief and endurance. Her name was Grace Thompson, the widow of another veteran buried not far from Mark. Grace was the kind of woman whose strength didn't show in words, but in the way she carried sorrow with quiet dignity. Her light blonde hair, streaked with silver, framed a pale, graceful face touched by the weight of time and loss. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly in the cold air. "I didn't mean to intrude. You must be Jack Miller." Jack nodded slowly, cautious but kind. "That's me. You must be Grace. I remember Mark mentioning you once. He said your husband served with us for a while before the last deployment." Grace hesitated, then opened her palm. Resting there was half of a military medal, its edge jagged as if cut in two. The ribbon was faded, and the bronze surface bore faint scratches. "I found this," she whispered. "Yesterday, when I was cleaning around my husband's grave. It was buried in the soil right by the headstone. I thought maybe you'd know what it means." Jack froze, his gaze locked on the medal, his heart pounding in disbelief. That medal wasn't ordinary. It was a silver star, awarded to soldiers who showed extraordinary bravery. But this one was different. Years ago, he and Mark Harris had shared a special medal, one they'd split in half as a promise before their final mission. Half for each of them, symbolizing that if one fell, the other would carry their story home. But Mark had died, and Jack had buried his half with him. The one in Grace's hand shouldn't exist. Jack's voice came out low, almost hoarse. "Where exactly did you find it?" "Right by the roots of the oak tree near my husband's grave," she replied. "I thought maybe it belonged to him, but then I saw the inscription, for valor, MH and JM. I don't know what it means, but—" Jack took the medal carefully, his gloved fingers tracing the worn letters. The memories flooded back, the chaos of that final battle, the explosion, the screams. He remembered kneeling beside Mark's lifeless body, promising he'd never forget. But how could the other half be here, miles away from where it should have been buried? He swallowed hard. "This belonged to Mark Harris. We made a vow before we went in. I buried his half with him myself. If this turned up again, it means someone dug it up, or someone never let it rest." Grace's eyes filled with confusion and fear. But who would do that? Before Jack could answer, Rex suddenly stood, ears perked, growling softly at the tree line. A figure in a dark parka moved behind the fog before vanishing into the mist. Jack's instincts sharpened instantly. "Get down," he hissed. He crouched beside Grace, scanning the tree line with a soldier's precision. Nothing moved now except drifting fog. When the silence returned, Grace looked at him with worry. "You think someone's been watching?" Jack didn't reply immediately. He picked up a small piece of disturbed soil near the grave, noticing boot prints half covered by frost. "Yeah," he muttered. "Someone was here before us, and they weren't just visiting." Grace shivered. "Maybe we should tell Sheriff Collins." "I will," Jack said, pocketing the half medal. "But first I need to know why this showed up. Some things are better understood before the law gets involved." She studied him, his calm, deliberate way of speaking, the quiet fire behind his eyes. "You've seen too much of this world, haven't you?" Jack gave a faint, weary smile. "More than I wanted to. But maybe it's time I stopped pretending peace and justice ever walk the same road." Rex barked once, as if agreeing. The sun began to rise higher, casting pale light through the fog, turning the frost into glistening dew. Jack stood, straightening his jacket. He looked down at the grave one last time and whispered under his breath, "If there's a reason this came back to me, Mark, I'll find it." Grace clasped her hands, whispering a silent prayer before walking away slowly toward the cemetery gate. Jack watched her go, her posture straight, though her steps were heavy with unspoken memories. He glanced at Rex, then at the medal glinting faintly in his palm. Something deep in his gut told him this wasn't just coincidence. It was a message. As the wind swept across the valley, carrying the scent of pine and earth, Jack turned toward the road leading out of town. The medal felt heavy in his pocket. Not just metal, but memory, guilt, and an unanswered call from the past. Rex trotted beside him, tail low but alert. Together they walked away from the cemetery, unaware that the first thread of a much darker mystery had just been pulled. The next day, a heavy gray sky hung over Redwood Hollow. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Jack Miller drove his old Ford pickup through the empty highway leading out of town. Rex sitting upright in the passenger seat, his sharp eyes scanning the road ahead. The radio murmured faintly, a local news anchor reporting on a series of break-ins near the veteran housing district. Jack turned it off. He didn't need more noise. His mind was already a battlefield of questions. He spent the morning driving to Riverton, a nearby town where several of his old unit members had settled after the war. The first stop was a small auto repair shop run by Eddie Brooks, a man in his early 50s with dark skin, salt and pepper hair, and a permanent limp from a shrapnel injury. Eddie had always been the joker of the team, but now his laughter had long vanished, replaced by the slow, guarded movements of someone who trusted no one. His hands, rough and scarred, trembled slightly when Jack mentioned the metal. "Don't bring that up again, Jack," Eddie muttered, glancing toward the closed garage door. "You don't know what kind of trouble that thing carries." Jack frowned. "You were there when we split it. You and Mark both saw me bury my half with him. So how did Grace find it buried by her husband's grave?" Eddie rubbed his temples. "It's not a memory, Jack. It's a warning. The medal wasn't just some brotherhood token. It marked something we weren't supposed to find. You remember Operation Iron Vault?" Jack stiffened. That name hadn't crossed his mind in years. It was an unofficial mission, wiped from all records, involving a sealed bunker and crates no one was allowed to open. That operation was top secret. They told us those crates held confiscated munitions. Eddie shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. "They lied. It wasn't weapons. It was gold. Tons of it. We were told to bury it and forget it ever existed. Mark wanted to go back for it after the war, but someone stopped him. That metal was our key, Jack. It was supposed to unlock whatever we left behind." Before Jack could press further, a loud bang echoed from outside. Rex growled, leaping toward the door. Jack rushed out, scanning the street, but saw only a black SUV speeding away, tires screeching. He returned to find Eddie pale and sweating, staring at the floor. "They're watching," Eddie muttered. "You need to stop digging before they dig your grave instead." By afternoon, Jack drove back toward town, his jaw clenched in silence. The metal in his pocket seemed heavier now. Every mile made him more certain that this was no coincidence. Someone wanted the past buried for good. That evening, as dusk settled, Jack stopped by Grace's house. It was a small white cottage near the edge of the woods, with a porch light flickering under the wind. Grace opened the door, her face tense but relieved to see him. "Jack, I'm glad you're here. Rex was right, someone's been around." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. Grace stepped aside, motioning toward the backyard. "Footprints. I saw them this morning near the shed, and last night I heard something moving by the window." Rex padded across the porch, sniffing the air, then barked twice, sharp and warning. Jack's instincts kicked in. He followed the tracks into the damp grass, his flashlight beam catching the outline of boot prints leading toward the woods. They were fresh. Whoever it was had been watching the house. Grace stood behind him, clutching her coat tightly. "You think it's connected to that metal?" Jack nodded. "Everything about this feels wrong. Whoever's after it isn't done yet." Before leaving, Jack told Grace to keep her doors locked and to call Sheriff Collins if she saw anything suspicious. She nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. As Jack turned away, she said softly, "Be careful, Jack. Some memories aren't meant to be reopened." Later that night, the wind howled through the empty streets of Redwood Hollow. Jack sat by the window of his cabin, Rex lying by the fire, ears twitching. The phone rang. It was Sheriff Collins, a broad man in his mid-50s with thinning brown hair, a square jaw, and the kind of patience that comes from decades of small-town law enforcement. His calm voice carried an undertone of urgency. "Jack, I thought you should hear this from me. You remember Ray Dalton? Served with you and Mark?" Jack's stomach tightened. "Yeah, what about him?" Collins exhaled. "He's dead. Found tonight behind his barn. Looked like he fought back. Busted knuckles, bruises everywhere. But here's the strange part. He was holding something in his hand. A piece of metal, shaped like part of a dog tag, with a serial number scratched on it." Jack's pulse quickened. "What number?" "Couldn't read it clearly, but it starts with IV. Maybe Iron Vault means something to you?" Jack's silence spoke louder than words. Collins continued, "I'll keep this between us for now. But Jack, whatever you're caught in, tread carefully. The kind of people who leave a trail like this, they don't stop." Jack looked at Rex, whose eyes reflected the firelight. The dog lifted his head, sensing his master's unease. Jack whispered, "Looks like the ghosts from the past aren't done with us, boy." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Somewhere in the dark, the truth waited, buried under 10 years of silence and guarded by men who'd kill to keep it that way. A pale dawn spread across Redwood Hollow, bringing with it a bitter chill that seeped through every crack of Jack Miller's old cabin. The air smelled faintly of rain and pine sap. Jack's right arm was bandaged from the skirmish at Grace's property the night before, but he refused to rest. He sat at his kitchen table with Sheriff Collins, papers, and an old military map spread between them. The half-metal lay under the dim light, gleaming faintly, a silent key to something buried too deep for peace. Sheriff Tom Collins, a broad man in his mid-50s, looked tired, the kind of fatigue that comes not from lack of sleep, but from years of keeping ugly truths quiet. His square jaw was shadowed with stubble, and his eyes, usually calm, flickered with unease. "I pulled some strings," he said, voice low. "Checked the database for that serial number, but guess what? Every record tied to Operation Iron Vault has been wiped clean. Someone went in and deleted it from military archives." Jack frowned. "Then whoever's behind this still has reach inside the system. It's not just veterans we're dealing with." Collins nodded grimly. "I've seen cover-ups before, but this one feels big." Rex, lying near the stove, lifted his head and let out a soft growl. The dog's amber eyes fixed on the window. Jack followed the gaze, saw only the curtain moving with the breeze. His instincts told him they were being watched, but there was no proof. Only the unease that had haunted him since Grace handed him the medal. Later that afternoon, they drove out to a storage facility on the outskirts of town, following the last lead left by Eddie Brooks before he disappeared that morning. The facility's caretaker, Samuel "Sam" Dugan, greeted them warily. He was in his 60s, short and wiry, with deep wrinkles and the hollow eyes of a man who'd buried too many friends. His hands, veined and steady, showed the precision of a lifelong worker. "I remember your unit," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "You boys stored something here once. Early winter, 10 years ago. Big metal crates, no markings, all sealed. I asked questions, and they told me to forget it." Jack leaned forward. "Who told you that?" Sam hesitated. "Two men, military contractors, or so they said. Both wore black uniforms with no insignia. One had a scar down his left cheek. Looked like a burn. Cold eyes, blue as ice. Never forgot that face." Collins jotted it down. "Name?" Sam shook his head. "Never gave one. But they came back a week later and took the crates. or claimed to. I saw trucks heading north that night, toward the old base in Wind River Canyon. Jack's pulse quickened. Wind River Canyon, his last deployment site. The place where half his memories and most of his nightmares came from. He looked at Collins. That's our next stop. By late evening, clouds gathered heavy over the horizon, and the two men arrived at the abandoned base. The facility was overgrown with weeds, its barbed wire fences sagging, guard towers reduced to rust and silence. Jack parked near the collapsed hangar and stepped out, his boots crunching on broken glass and gravel. Rex sniffed the ground, tail low, ears twitching with unease. Collins unfolded the map. "Coordinates match here," he said, pointing to an old supply depot near the canyon ridge. "Whatever they buried, it's under this spot." They began to dig, shovels cutting through wet soil and roots. After an hour, they hit metal, a dull, hollow sound. Jack knelt and brushed away the dirt. Beneath lay the corner of a steel crate, its edges corroded but intact. He ran his fingers over the faded military code painted on its side. IV-77A. The same letters that began the serial number on the metal. Jack exhaled. This is it. This is what they didn't want us to find. But before they could pry it open, Rex barked sharply, his fur bristling. Jack turned and saw movement in the shadows. Figures emerged from behind the ruined walls, 6 of them, all in tactical gear, faces hidden by black balaclavas. Their rifles gleamed under the dim light. "Drop the shovel," one commanded, voice cold and distorted through a mask. Collins raised his hands, his other reaching slowly toward his sidearm. "We're law enforcement," he said, steady but cautious. "Identify yourselves." The men gave no answer. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the canyon. Jack dove behind a rusted jeep, bullets sparking off the metal. Rex charged forward, teeth bared, leaping at one attacker and dragging him down. The others returned fire. Jack crawled toward the crate, grabbed the metal from his pocket, and shoved it into a crack on the crate's lock mechanism. It fit perfectly, turning with a click before the ground trembled beneath them. An explosion ripped through the far end of the depot. Someone had triggered a mine. The blast threw Jack backward, pain slicing through his shoulder as shrapnel tore into his flesh. Collins dragged him behind cover, shouting, "We're outnumbered!" Rex limped toward them, a streak of blood on his flank, but still standing. The masked men retreated into the storm, leaving behind smoke and chaos. As silence fell, Jack pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder and looked at the half-open crate. Inside, he glimpsed rows of gold bars, their surfaces glinting beneath the dust. Collins stared in disbelief. "Jesus, Jack. You were right." Jack's voice was weak but steady. "And now they know we found it." Thunder cracked overhead. The rain began to fall, washing blood and dirt into the earth that had hidden secrets for a decade. The rain had not stopped since the ambush. It poured relentlessly across the Pine Valley, drumming on the tin roof of Jack Miller's cabin. Inside, the dim light flickered as Jack sat on the couch, his shoulder tightly bandaged. The wound ached with every breath, but his mind was far from rest. Rex lay beside him, his flank wrapped with gauze, eyes half closed yet alert, too loyal to sleep before his master did. The metal, now cleaned of mud and blood, rested on the table next to a damp leather notebook, Grace's journal. Grace sat quietly across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Her face looked paler than before, eyes shadowed with worry. The once composed woman now carried the exhaustion of someone who had stared too long into danger. "You need to rest," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Jack shook his head. "Not yet. This journal of yours. There's something here I missed." Grace hesitated, then handed him a page she had marked. The handwriting was faded, belonging to her late husband. "That was written a week before he died," she whispered. Jack read aloud. "If anything happens to me, find Tom. He still has the other half. The truth isn't buried. It's guarded." Jack froze. Tom? Tom Harris? His heart pounded. Tom Harris had been his best friend in the Marines, the man he saw die during the last firefight. The explosion had torn through their unit, and Jack had carried what was left of Tom's dog tag back home. Grace nodded slowly. "I didn't know who he was, but your reaction when I mentioned the medal. I figured he must have been important." Jack closed the journal, stood, and looked out the rain-smeared window. If Tom's alive, he's the missing link, and he's the reason someone's killing everyone connected to Iron Vault. The next morning, under a dull gray sky, Jack and Rex drove north toward the foothills near Wind River Canyon. Sheriff Collins was still recovering from the previous night's chaos, so Jack went alone. The mountain road was slick and winding, leading to an isolated cabin marked only by a rusty mailbox. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. Someone was there. He stepped out carefully, hand resting on his holster. Rex stayed close, muscles tense. The cabin door creaked open, and a man stepped out. A ghost from the past. Tom Harris stood before him, older, rougher, but undeniably alive. His hair was streaked with white, his beard thick and unkempt. Deep scars marked the left side of his face, one running from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the explosion that was supposed to have killed him. His right hand trembled slightly, the fingers missing their tips, as if burned long ago. Yet his blue eyes, cold and sharp, were the same. "Jack," Tom said, voice low and gravelly. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Jack stared at him, disbelief fighting with relief. "You died, Tom. I saw you go down." Tom gave a bitter smile. "They wanted you to think that. I was pulled from the wreck by the cleanup crew. Contractors, not soldiers. They made me disappear." Jack's jaw tightened. "Who are they?" Tom stepped back inside, motioning him to follow. The cabin was cluttered with old maps, military gear, and stacks of newspaper clippings about missing veterans. The same people running Iron Vault. After the war, they used us to move confiscated gold. War spoils, black budget stuff. When they realized some of us knew too much, they started erasing us. He turned, eyes dark. Mark tried to expose them. That's why he died. Jack felt a chill. And the medal? Tom reached into a metal box and pulled out the second half of the silver star. This was our failsafe. Together, the halves unlock a compartment in one of the crates. A record of every name, every transfer, everything they buried. Jack stared at it. "So that's what they're after. Proof." Tom nodded grimly. "Proof that the gold was stolen and that our unit was the cover. They can't afford anyone to have it." A faint bark broke the tension. Rex, outside, warning. Jack moved to the window. Two black SUVs crawled up the muddy road, headlights cutting through the fog. Tom cursed under his breath. "They found me. They always do." Jack turned to him. "We can't outrun them forever. We take the proof and make it public." Tom hesitated. "That's suicide. You think the government's going to thank us for exposing their dirty work?" "Maybe not," Jack said, loading his rifle. "But Grace deserves the truth. So did Mark. As the vehicle stopped outside, the air filled with the crackle of radio static and the faint click of rifles being loaded. Tom handed Jack the second half of the medal. Then let's finish what we started. The door shook under the first impact. Bullets shattered the windows. Rex lunged toward the doorway, snarling. Jack returned fire, covering Tom as he packed the documents into a metal case. The air reeked of gunpowder and wet wood. When the shooting paused, Jack and Tom bolted out the back door, disappearing into the woods under the cover of rain. Behind them, the cabin burned. The two halves of the metal gleamed faintly in Jack's hand, united once more, and now holding the last secret of Iron Vault. The forest of Wind River Canyon was quiet again, but it was the kind of silence that comes before the storm. Heavy clouds smothered the mountaintops, and the smell of rain and gunpowder still lingered in the air. Jack Miller trudged through the wet earth, his shoulder stiff from the wound that refused to heal. Rex padded beside him, fur damp and matted, ears twitching at every faint rustle in the undergrowth. Behind them, Tom Harris carried the metal case containing the documents and the two halves of the Silver Star medal, now locked together as one. His expression was grim, as though the weight in his hands was heavier than gold itself. They moved cautiously through the trees, heading toward a clearing that opened into a vast pit, a scar in the landscape where the hidden vault had once been buried. Smoke still rose from the smoldering remains of Tom's cabin somewhere behind them. The truth had cost them blood, and Jack knew it wasn't over. Whoever had sent those men would not stop until the evidence was destroyed. From the ridge above, the sound of an approaching helicopter echoed. Its rotors cut through the mist like the roar of some mechanical beast. Jack raised his binoculars. The chopper was black, unmarked, descending fast toward the clearing. "They're here," he muttered. Tom's jaw tightened. "I told you, Jack. They'll burn it all before they let anyone talk." The helicopter landed near the pit, blowing up a whirlwind of dust and pine needles. From it stepped Colonel Richard Kane, a man once decorated for valor and now long retired, at least on paper. Kane was in his late 60s but carried himself with the authority of a man who had never truly left the battlefield. His uniform jacket, though stripped of insignia, was pressed and immaculate. His white hair was cropped short, his face weathered and square-jawed, the kind of face that used to inspire soldiers and now hid sins too large to confess. Jack's heart hardened. He remembered Kane, his commanding officer during Operation Iron Vault, the man who had ordered silence after the mission went wrong, the man who had buried the truth along with the gold. Kane's voice carried easily over the wind. "I should have known you'd still be digging, Miller. You never could let sleeping ghosts lie." Jack stepped forward, rifle in hand. "You buried more than ghosts, Colonel. You buried men. Mark Harris, Ray Dalton, Eddie Brooks, all dead because they tried to tell the truth." Kane smirked faintly, as if amused by the accusation. "They were soldiers, Miller. They did what soldiers do, follow orders. You think the world needs to know about a few crates of misplaced gold? About how far we went to win? The truth doesn't serve the living. It only ruins the dead." Tom emerged from behind a tree, his voice low but sharp. "You ruined them when you made us accomplices. You turned us into gravekeepers of your crime." Kane's eyes flicked toward Tom, narrowing in disbelief. "Harris, I thought you were dead." "Yeah," Tom said. "You made sure of that." Kane's composure slipped for a second before he nodded toward his men. 4 soldiers in tactical armor who stepped out from the helicopter, rifles raised. "I'll give you one chance, gentlemen. Hand over the medal and the documents, and I'll let you walk out alive." Jack shook his head. You won't. You can't. The moment we hand them over, you'll erase us like you did everyone else. The colonel's smile vanished. Then you leave me no choice. Gunfire shattered the stillness. Jack dove behind a fallen log as bullets tore through bark. Tom returned fire from behind a boulder, while Rex charged forward, knocking one soldier off balance and biting into his arm. The man screamed before falling into the mud. Jack took another shot, hitting a second attacker square in the chest. But Kane wasn't retreating. He was moving toward the vault entrance, dragging a detonator from his coat. Jack shouted, "He's gonna blow it!" Tom ran out from cover, firing as he went. A bullet grazed his side, but he didn't stop. He tackled Kane just as the old man pressed the trigger. The explosion ripped through the clearing, throwing dirt, smoke, and fire into the air. The vault collapsed inward, swallowing the gold, the bodies, and the sins of a forgotten war. When the dust settled, Jack crawled from the debris, coughing, ears ringing. The forest glowed orange with firelight. Rex limped to his side, muzzle streaked with soot. A few feet away, Tom lay on his back, blood soaking his shirt. But he was alive. Jack knelt beside him. "We did it," he said hoarsely. Tom managed a faint smile. "Yeah, buried it. For good this time." His voice weakened. "Promise me, Jack. Don't let it die with us. Tell Grace. Tell her Mark didn't die for nothing." Jack clasped his friend's hand. "I promise." Tom exhaled slowly and closed his eyes, the faintest trace of peace crossing his scarred face. Days later, back in Redwood Hollow, the rain had finally stopped. Jack stood once more at the cemetery beneath the whispering pines. Grace was there, her hair tied back, a soft breeze brushing across her tired features. Jack placed the reunited Silver Star medal into her hands. "He wanted you to have it," he said quietly. Grace looked down at it, tears glimmering. "What about the gold?" Jack gazed toward the horizon, where the mountains faded into mist. "Gone. Buried where it belongs." He paused, then added softly, "Sometimes the real treasure isn't what we dig up. It's what we choose to keep alive." Rex sat at his side, tail curled neatly, watching the woman as if understanding every word. Grace smiled through her tears. "He'd be proud of you, Jack. All of them would." Jack said nothing. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying away the ghosts of war, leaving only the quiet echo of redemption. Sometimes, God's greatest miracles don't come as lightning in the sky. They come as quiet moments of courage, of love, and of faith that refuses to die. Jack didn't find gold beneath the earth. He found something far greater: forgiveness, loyalty, and the strength to do what's right, even when no one is watching. In our own lives, we all face battles, not on the front lines, but in our hearts. Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt us. Maybe it's finding hope again after loss. Or maybe it's simply believing that no matter how dark things get, God is still working behind the scenes. If this story touched your heart, please don't scroll away. Leave a comment and tell us what true treasure means to you. Share this video so others can feel the same light. And if you believe that faith still changes lives, subscribe and join us on this journey of hope. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and remind you that you are never alone. God's grace still writes the most powerful stories, even through people like us.